The schools were segregated, but back at that time, I think almost every community had its own little school. I've often said there were probably 50 different schools around Morgan County, and I'm probably not too far off when I say that. But we had a school in our community, and it was the Smyrna School, named for the church that was fairly close. The church was on one side of the Georgia Railroad track, and the school was on the other. That's what I remember. Just prior to that, before this building was placed there, the kids that lived in the community actually went to school in the church. The church building served as the school, but I don't remember that. I remember the little building that was across the railroad track from the church. The land for that school was provided by one of the landowners, and he allowed the Board of Education to use that for school as long as the school was there, and then when the school was no longer there, it reverted back to the family. My mother has told me that I started school, this was pre-kindergarten, but I started school when I was 5. And the reason was because I had other relatives who were going to school, and I played with them during the day when they were not in school. They wanted me to go to school, so they took me at 5. But my first teacher, her name was Hazeltine Mitchell. Her husband was pastor of the church, and his name was Walter Mitchell. But those folks, that family, they were always favorites of mine. Again, this was a one-room schoolhouse. It was fairly, even though it was a one-room school, it was a fairly large room. Reverend Mitchell and the men in the community actually built the school. I was told that the Board of Education supplied the money for the lumber, but the community actually put the building up. It was a fairly nice building. I remember that we had a library, and there were books in one section of that room. There was a stage, so when the community had plays or whatever, the stage was used for that. There was a small kitchen. The restrooms were outside, and there was one for the girls and one for the boys. We probably had, I'm guessing, 55, 60 students at that time in that one building. And they came from all around, as far as Buckhead or near Buckhead, back up to Smyrna, and all the surrounding areas attended there. We had one teacher, and that one teacher was responsible for all of those kids, but they were always smart. The teachers were. What she did was to use the older kids to help with small groups of kids, some of the same techniques that are being used in our schools today, small group instruction. But that's the way it was accomplished, and that's where my learning first started. I mentioned we did have books in our library, but most of the materials that we had were materials that had been passed along to us from the white school at that time. They were no longer being used there, so they were sent to us to be used. I never remember during that time the teachers having had the opportunity of ordering textbooks to be used, but they were requested from a depository somewhere in the county, and of course they were sent to us. And we knew that because you'd get the books and here were the students' names in them. So, but that was the beginning.